whenever you'd like.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good evening and welcome to our virtual meeting of Brampton's Planning and Development Committee. This meeting will be held through remote electronic participation in accordance with the Municipal Act 2001. City Council has authorized virtual meetings of its committees with members participating remotely to facilitate the continuation of city business during this current pandemic. We will begin today's meeting with the City Clerk calling the roll for attendance at today's meeting.
Members of the committee, I will call your name. Please indicate your presence. Councillor Santos?
Present.
Councillor Vasante?
Present.
Councillor Willens?
Sorry, Peter, present.
Thank you. Councillor Paleshi?
Present.
Councillor Bowman?
Present.
Councillor Williams?
I'm present.
Councillor Fortini?
I'm here, Pierre.
Thank you. Councillor Singh?
Present.
And Councillor Dillon is absent, and Chair Medeiros is here. There are 9 members present, Mr. Chair. You do have quorum.
Thank you very much, Peter. Our next item is approval of the agenda. Does any member wish to add a business item to tonight's meeting? I see none. So can I have a motion moved by Councillor Fortini to approve the agenda?
Mr. Chair?
The agenda for the, yep.
I believe you were going to add a correspondence, item 11.2, which is correspondence from the region regarding membership on the Regional Planning and Growth Management Committee. And then we'll distribute that.
My apologies. Yep.
So that would be 11.2.
Item 11.2, so noted by the City Clerk. As I see no further additions, I do have a motion moved by Councillor Fortini to approve the agenda, that the agenda for the regular Planning and Development Committee meeting of February 1st, 2021 be approved. And the communication correspondence regarding 11.2 from the region regarding appointing representatives to Region's Planning and Growth Committee, Management Committee. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote will count in the affirmative. No objections, so the motion carries. Our next item is declaration of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Do any members have a declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for any matter to be considered on today's agenda? Seeing none, so the clerk will so note for the meeting minutes. Our next item is consent motion. I have 2 items in consent. Item 7.3, staff report regarding Bram East, Area 41 Gorway Drive Corridor, and the minutes for Brampton Heritage Board. Are there any additions to the consent motion? No. I have a motion moved by Councillor Vicente to approve the consent motion, that the following items be approved as part of the consent motion as they are considered to be routine and non-controversial. Item 7.3, Bram East and Gorway Drive Corridor, secondary plan review, and item 8.1 minutes, Brampton Heritage Board, January 19th. So I do have a motion again moved by Councillor Vicente. Is anyone opposed? No, thank you. We go on now to our statutory public meeting. The section for the statutory public meeting is a public meeting of the Planning and Development Committee held in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act of Ontario. The proposals to be heard at this planning meeting are the result of applications made under the Planning Act. These are not proposals of the City of Brampton unless they are specifically identified as city-initiated proposals. Tonight, we do not have any city-initiated proposals. The intent of this public meeting is to receive submissions from the public regarding these proposals. Given we may have persons watching this meeting through the city's live stream, we will have staff present each proposal subject to statutory public meeting unless committee decides otherwise. After receiving any pre-registered delegations, members of the committee may ask questions for clarification but will not engage in debate on the proposal at this time. Committee consideration of the proposal will occur at a future meeting when planning staff bring forward the final recommendation on each proposal. The city has posted to its website supporting information documentation for these development applications for public review and reference. We will now proceed to consider the one item on this evening's statutory public meeting. After consideration of these public meeting items, the committee will deal with the balance of the agenda items on tonight's agenda. Our statutory item is 5.1, Castle Bridge Development, Ward 6, 1079 Credit View Road, and I will ask staff presentation from Himanshu Katyal from the Planning Development, Building Economic Development. Welcome, Himanshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the committee and the public. My name is Himanshu Katyal, and I'm the planner assigned to process and review this application. to amend the official plan, zoning bylaw, and proposed draft plan of subdivision. Please note that the committee will not make a decision today. The purpose of this public meeting is to provide information to the public and seek feedback on the application. The subject lands are located at 10799 Credit View Road, at the intersection of Credit View Road and Buick Boulevard. Next slide. Surrounding land uses include existing single detached dwellings to the north and east, future residential uses consisting of semi-detached dwellings to the immediate south, and existing residential uses beyond, and Credit View Road to the west, beyond which are residential uses consisting of townhouses. The application proposes an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, as well as a draft plan of subdivision to permit 4 single detached dwellings with a height of 2 stories, minimum lot area of 270 square meters for interior lots and 360 square meters for the corner lot. And the minimum lot frontage will be 10.6 meters for interior lots and 9.6 meters for the corner lot. Each lot will have 2 parking spaces, and the access will be from Buick Boulevard. Next slide. The official plan designation is residential on Schedule A, general land use designations. This designation permits a broad range of residential uses, ranging from single detached dwellings to apartment units. The official plan designation on Schedule A2 convenience retail structure is convenience retail. This designation permits small-scale retail and commercial uses that primarily serve the surrounding residential area. An official plan amendment is required. Similar to the A2 schedule, the Fletcher's Meadow secondary plan designates the property as convenience retail as well and permits same kinds of uses. An amendment to the secondary plan is also required. Next slide. The property is currently zoned agricultural, which permits agricultural uses, residential uses, a group home, cemetery, a hospital, animal hospital, a kennel, and a home occupation. An amendment to the zoning bylaw will be required to permit this development. Next slide. As we discussed earlier, the official plan and secondary plan amendment will be required to remove the commercial convenience retail designation from Schedule A2 and to redesignate the property to a low or medium density residential designation in the secondary plan. This designation will be consistent with the surrounding residential area designations. Next slide. The zoning bylaw amendment submitted with the application proposes to rezone the property to a residential zone with site-specific provisions to permit the 3 interior lots and 1 corner lot. Next slide. At this time, staff has noted these issues that will need to be addressed. Confirmation that the removal of the existing convenience retail designation is justified through a market study, and whether the proposed development incorporates a building design that is compatible with the character of the neighborhood. Next slide. Prior to finalizing recommendations to council, this application will be further evaluated for consistency with the Planning Act, provincial policy statement, conformity with the growth plan, the Region of Peel official plan, and the City of Brampton official plan. Next slide. Staff will continue the review of the application, including reviewing comments from the public. Staff at a later date will advance a final recommendation report to council for a decision. Issues that have been raised will be addressed in the recommendation report. Staff will contact and follow up with those residents who have provided their comments through all channels. Next slide. The report and submitted materials associated with tonight's meeting is available online. The presentation will also be available online shortly. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact myself, my manager, or the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments? I see none, so I do have a motion moved by Councillor Palashi. Sorry, City Clerk, does the applicant want to speak?
Mr. Chair, we do have the planning consultant, Raj Rajakumar, present should there be any questions, but they have not requested to speak. And also,
Okay.
we did have a delegation from Vaipul Thakar, but unfortunately, Vaipul Thakar has not attended to this evening's meeting, and there is correspondence item 11.1 on today's agenda regarding this item.
Okay, thank you very much, City Clerk. I do not see any questions or comments, so I do have a motion moved by Councillor Palaszczuk to approve the staff report recommendation applicant, well, not delegation, I guess what was supposed to be the delegation, but essentially the motion reads as the staff report, application to amend the official plan, zoning bylaw, proposed draft plan of subdivision, Castle Bridge Development Group Limited, to the Planning and Development Committee meeting of February 1st, and that the Planning and Development staff be directed to report back to the Planning and Development Committee with the results of the public meeting and the staff recommendations subsequent to the completion of the circulation of the application and a comprehensive evaluation of the proposal. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? No
And the
objection.
communication, Mr. Chair. Happy to move both with the communication.
With the communication as well. Thank you very much, Councillor Palaszczuk. I do not see any objections, so the motion carries. Thank you. We go now on to public delegations, and City Clerk, our first item is 6.2.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. 6.1 is, sorry, the delegation did not attend, so we're on to 6.2.
Okay,
And-
so we have, yeah.
And Mr. Chair, so this delegation from Gideon Foreman from the David Suzuki Foundation is in regards to staff report and presentation 7.1 and 7.2 on tonight's agenda. So in accordance with the procedure bylaw, staff will make their presentation first, followed by the delegation, and then followed by consideration of the staff report.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we'll just bring up the presentation here momentarily.
Good evening, Chair and members of Planning Committee, City staff, and Brampton residents. My name is Henrik Spogar. I'm the Senior Manager of Transportation Planning. And I'm here this evening to provide an overview of staff's report that summarizes the objectives and principles that are going to be framing the review of the city's current transportation master plan, which we've initiated. Since the last TMP was approved, there have been some major changes in policy and direction led no less by the city's 2040 vision that are challenging us to revisit how we address urban mobility needs, to think about all of the elements that are important to comprehensively designing a city built for its people, and to think beyond the conventional suburban approaches that have guided transportation planning efforts in cities like Brampton for many decades. Next. The Transportation Master Plan has been the city's blueprint for strategic mobility planning. It provides guidance for investing in and developing multimodal solutions to address travel demand as a result of population and employment growth over a 20-year horizon, and doing so in an environmentally and economically sustainable way. TMP looked at high-level, long-term needs for road infrastructure, transit infrastructure, freight, and active transportation linkages to 2041. The plan also makes recommendations for actions and policies to implement over a 5 to 10 year period until the plan is again reviewed, and informs the transportation component of the development charges bylaw update and the 10-year roads capital program. The TMP is reviewed approximately every 5 years to respond to changing policy, demographic, and transportation best practices. The current TMP was approved in 2015, and that one built on recommendations from the previous 2004 and the 2009 plan. The review essentially tests previous and new strategic recommendations for meeting future aspirations, such as those contained in the vision, to ensure that the TMP remains consistent and relevant to guide future planning for the city's mobility needs. Next slide, please. Past TMPs have provided important guidance that has been instrumental in advancing Brampton's evolution and growth and responding to the challenges of moving people and goods in a rapidly growing and urbanizing environment. We've had some major gains in several areas. I'll start with transit. which includes the implementation of Zoom, here Ontario Queen Bovaird Steels, and now the exploration of expansion projects in other corridors. Transit has been an industry and leading increase in ridership that were outpacing population growth. We are involved extensively now in service coordination with other transit providers, be those our municipal partners in Mississauga and York Region, or the work that we're doing with Metrolinx and with the province. And currently, transit is undertaking the expansion and the early planning for here Ontario main light rail transit. On the active transportation side, the 2015 Transportation Master Plan developed a citywide candidate network and recommended development of an AT Master Plan to rationalize and refine the implementation of the active transportation network. And this is a plan completed and endorsed by Council in 2019. Complete Streets was also another recommendation that came out of the previous Transportation Master Plan, recommending that the city undertake a review of its roadway and design standards to ensure that all roads are designed and planned for all users with a focus on pedestrians and cyclists. In this regard, staff has been undertaking the development of a complete street approaches guideline currently in progress. Next slide, please. The work on previous TMPs and the subsequent implementation have also led identification of some issues and emerging considerations. Previous TMPs had been paired with the transportation background component of the development charges bylaw update. Through this process, demand forecasting and modeling essentially alone had led the work. But because these conventional models and approaches are largely automobile-centric, there's been an emphasis on accommodating new growth through the provision of additional automobile capacity, which in turn has informed the input for development charges. What this ends up doing is it manifests in a road network recommendation that's characterized by widenings to 6 lanes to accommodate forecasted demand. However, as we've been finding out, we know that building additional lane capacity for automobiles is not a viable long-term strategy to manage congestion. And ultimately, such a strategy can constrain opportunities to accommodate, let alone equalize, other viable forms of mobility if we are to build to our 2040 vision aspirations. In this TMP review study, the development charges background component has delinked, so to speak, in order that the focus be on developing a policy and planning recommendation that would then inform future DC work and provide the justification needed to support collection of transportation DCs for mobility improvements that are not limited essentially to new lanes just for automobiles. On the road network planning side, again, the previous plans have always built on kind of industry practices and kind of conventional approaches. This approach has been informed largely again by travel demand modeling, which projects demand into the transportation network based on forecasted employment and population growth to 2041. The model identifies constraints that are resolved through road widening. However, as mentioned, previous plans have confirmed that we can't build our way out of congestion by continually adding more vehicle lanes. Travel demand modeling is a widely used tool that's evolved since the 1960s and 70s to plan for the mobility needs of rapidly growing low-density suburbs. The need to accommodate automobile traffic will continue to play an important role in transportation decision-making. However, the impact for planning that is based in favor of accommodating levels of service for automobiles has impacts to neighborhoods and sustainable travel modes that needs to be acknowledged and addressed. Through detailed program planning such as environmental assessments and detailed design studies, staff are finding plans to widen roads, particularly those from 4 to 6 lanes in a limited right-of-way, have consequences that affect things like the attractiveness of communities and limiting those amenities and features that help to accommodate and to encourage shifts to alternate modes. So again, this is not to say that the vehicular mode should be marginalized. It's always going to be part of our mobility landscape. One of the key activities staff has been involved over the past year is actually to update our travel demand model. And whereas previous models have been largely driven by that auto mode, the current state of the research and of the industry out there means that the model that we're now updating will include transit and trucking modules as well. And we're currently working on accommodation for consideration of active transportation in these models too. Next slide, please. So the key drivers informing this TMP review are alignment of the city's long-range transportation strategy with the 2040 vision more broadly, and more specifically through the guiding principles of complete streets. This is also very closely tied with term of council priorities to equalize all forms of transportation and to plan and design streets for people. Next slide, please. The Transportation Master Plan will be updated in accordance with the longer-term aspirations for the city as identified in the 2040 vision. Vision established key themes that underpin the transformation of Brampton: sustainability, livability, diversity, and health, with a focus on more public engagement and collaboration, elevated civic design, and utilizing technology to enhance the image and identity of Brampton. A key consideration for the review is that it have an understanding in regard to how transportation decision-making influences city-building factors beyond just mobility. The Brampton Vision aims for a more sustainable, urban, and vibrant direction for the city. It emphasizes an urban future focusing on uptown, downtown, and town center development intensification. Design and development will need to be mixed use, higher density, transit-oriented, with a priority for attractive pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. The vision goes so far as to identify and declare a need for a pedestrian-first decision-making framework. It suggests that rethinking street design is the top priority, and the primary direction of transportation planning and management is providing travel choices as alternatives to the car and reclaiming road space for other users and activities. The vision establishes a hierarchy of priorities for the city's transportation agenda, emphasizing first walking, then cycling, transit, goods movement, and then shared vehicles and private vehicles. This is also entirely tied to Council's priorities to equalize all forms of transportation and to build streets for people. Next slide, please. So just a bit on complete streets that I've mentioned before. Further to the vision and the term of council priorities and best practices, staff has been undertaking a complete street exercise for the past year and a bit. The Brampton Complete Streets guidelines are being developed to inform a rethink of street design to facilitate a more equitable planning and design process that considers service levels and experience of roads for all users and not just automobile drivers. The Complete Streets vision for Brampton states that streets in Brampton are a critical component to create and support a healthy, prosperous, and beautiful city for everyone. Brampton will have a comprehensive, integrated transportation network with streets that provide safe, equitable, and convenient travel for people of all ages and abilities and accommodate all users, including pedestrians, cyclists, transit users, and motorists. The vision is supported by the principles which are listed on the right-hand column of the slide that you see. The Complete Streets review of best practices and the rethinking of streets for all users reframed the transportation Brampton. And essentially, we've been treating this exercise as kind of a part one of the TMP review process, setting the stage and context for identifying the objectives and principles of the TMP review and update. Next slide, please. So the review of the TMP will be informed by the directions of the 2040 vision, which for transportation planning and management is to provide travel choices as alternatives to the car, reclaiming road space for other activities, and to establish that pedestrian-first decision-making framework. While the need to accommodate the movement of vehicular traffic cannot be denied, it must be balanced with other modes of travel. This review process will rethink the more conventional autocentric approach and tools utilized for network planning. It'll emphasize multimodal needs for city building and make recommendations for policy and projects for a more sustainable, green, attractive, healthy, and safe city. And finally, the review will leverage public engagement to enhance Brampton's integrated mobility network and to apply a decision-making framework that strongly considers impacts of transportation planning beyond mobility. This includes impacts to community life, travel choices, and the natural and built environments. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of the underlying principles that are informing the TMP review. When we talk about enhanced mobility and travel options for people and goods, this includes consideration of long-term needs for an integrated mobility network that supports travel options, accommodates travel demand from growth in a more sustainable way, connects people to places and moves goods to market, and supports prosperity and economic development. Advancing multimodal transportation equity is about increasing trips made by walking, cycling, and transit. It's about prioritizing accessibility, meeting the needs of all ages, abilities, and modes of travel. And it's about understanding and communicating the trade-offs between road design options and resulting travel behaviors and mode choices. Integrating transportation and land use planning. This is about planning for mobility solutions that support compact, high-density, mixed-use development in strategic center. And it's about prioritizing to connect transit and active transportation networks to facilitate short trips. Protecting public health and safety. This is embracing the Vision Zero objectives to reduce and ultimately eliminate fatalities and serious injuries from collisions while enhancing protection for pedestrians and cyclists. Improving environmental sustainability is about managing travel demand to reduce auto travel, especially single occupant vehicle trips. It's about integrating trees and green infrastructure and design to reduce heat island effect, to manage stormwater, and to reduce energy consumption. Ultimately, it's about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving air quality. Leveraging technology is about optimizing the existing auto network capacity to accommodate future travel demand through the use of technology, advanced traffic management, and travel demand management measures, and also to plan for the future of mobility and the impacts of new travel technologies, such as autonomous vehicles. And finally, emphasizing community engagement and collaboration. As we saw with the exercise for the 2040 vision, engaging citizens in a systematic and inclusive way of addressing mobility issues is key to supporting the implementation of the 2040 vision. Next slide, please. In terms of next steps, the TMP review is currently, we're in a procurement phase now to roll out a scope of work to engage a consultant for an 18-month work plan. It's a 4-phase work plan that will be looking at background review, issues identifications, and emerging directions. Second phase, that would be about developing vision and policy framework. The third one would be developing scenarios, evaluating networks, identifying projects and prioritizing. And then a fourth phase that would identify a preferred scenario or scenarios and the associated action plans. The other thing to consider here is that, as we've seen from projects such as Williams Parkway, the issue of how to deal with 6-lane widenings while the TMP is underway is going to be an issue that we need to address as well. To this end, staff from Planning and Public Works will be developing an interim strategy to review near-term widenings in light of Vision 2040, Complete Streets, and Term of Council priorities and the guiding TMP principles. Staff will be reporting back to Council with more information on this interim strategy and the associated next steps. Next slide, please. In conclusion, then, Vision 2040, Complete Streets, and Council's priorities are challenging us to rethink our approaches to how we plan and design for mobility and the implications of such processes on broader city objectives. Jane Jacobs, the renowned urban thinker, said, "Streets and their sidewalks, the main public places of a city, are its most vital organs. If a city's streets look interesting, the city looks interesting. If they look dull, the city looks dull." This ties very closely to what was stated in the city's 2040 vision, which said that the character of street sets the character of the whole city. If a municipality wants to change its image, it would seem it could just change its streets. These are seemingly intuitive and straightforward statements, but they do belie a much more complex reality. However, we are at a watershed moment for Brampton in its transformation and evolution as we try to shift from a suburban legacy of designing cities to move cars to an approach that strives for safer streets that still moves cars, but that are also attractive for walking, cycling, transit access and achieve broader objectives beyond simply mobility for a safe, green, healthy, and people-oriented city. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, next we have a delegation from Gideon, from the David Suzuki Foundation. And Gideon, my apologies, you can please go ahead to address the committee.
Okay.
We can hear you now.
You can hear me now. Great. Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members, city staff. Much appreciate the opportunity to speak today. My name is indeed Gideon Foreman. I'm a transportation policy analyst at the David Suzuki Foundation. We're here this evening to comment on the principles and objectives that will frame your review of the Transportation Master Plan. Let me begin by saying there's much in the staff report that we applaud. We congratulate you first on the accomplishments of your 2015 TMP, a major increase in transit ridership, implementation of the Zoom network, and of course initial planning on your light rail project. These are significant achievements, Mr. Chair, and you deserve, and your team deserves much credit for your leadership here. As well, we much appreciate the report's emphasis on walking, cycling, and public transit. These modes, as you know, are absolutely essential to the city's health and well-being. And we're also very pleased to find support for Vision Zero. The importance of protecting vulnerable road users, Mr. Chair, can't be overstated. But we do see some areas where we believe the report could be strengthened. For example, the objective section commits to a pedestrian-first decision-making framework. This is a very good step, but should be broadened, we believe, so it also assists people who ride a bike or use a wheelchair. We would recommend, therefore, that you embrace an active transportation-first approach. Under objectives, the report also urges the city to balance, quote unquote, the needs of vehicles with the needs of other transportation modes. We believe the climate emergency, Mr. Chair, demands not so much balance as prioritization. Low carbon mobility must be given pride of place. We note that near the report's conclusion, staff acknowledge this. They reference Council's priorities, including updating, and I quote, the TMP to prioritize active transportation and non-auto modes, unquote. We believe this approach is exactly right, Mr. Chair, and should feature prominently in the report. This leads inevitably to the question of road widening. We appreciate that the report does not avoid this difficult issue and understand the thinking behind staff advocating an interim strategy, but we believe the policy approach here needs to be stronger. The report should simply and clearly state that road widening is no longer on the table. Just as the city must live within its financial means, it must also live within its ecological and spatial means, Mr. Chair. That requires finding more efficient ways of moving people within the roadways you already have, rather than enlarging them. Expansion of roads has fostered sprawl, lethal air pollution, and the climate crisis. It has contributed to the loss of irreplaceable foodlands and natural areas. It has contributed to an epidemic of obesity, and it has consistently taken space and millions of public dollars away from sustainable transportation. In fact, Mr. Chair, road widening doesn't even accomplish the one thing it's supposed to achieve, relieving congestion. As staff themselves rightly point out, and I quote, we cannot build our way out of congestion by continually adding more vehicle lanes, unquote. I want to conclude by saying that prioritization of active transport also makes good business sense. Studies from around the world suggest that folks who walk and cycle visit retail streets more frequently, and they spend more money per month on these streets than people who drive. Mr. Chair, over the past few years, I've had the privilege of discussing transportation issues with students at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. And one of the first things that these MBA students taught me is that successful cities of the future will not be organized around the automobile. For good business reasons, they'll be designed primarily for transit, walking, and cycling. And cities that don't prioritize these modes, that don't prioritize active transport, will be left behind, according to the business students. We hope you'll keep these wise words in mind as you review your Transportation Master Plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do any members of committee have questions for the delegation? I do see you, Councillor Santos. Is this for the delegation or is it for the report to staff?
I guess in comments, in follow-up to the delegation, thank you, Gideon, for the comments.
Pleasure.
Today. I'm just wondering if staff can just respond to the delegation. That would be great, and then I'm happy to add my comments and questions after.
Well, thank you, Councillor Santos. I don't know if there's anything that staff would need to report to. I don't know if there's questions of committee that want to. Are you asking for staff to address some of the comments made by the delegation?
I am, yes, thank you.
Does staff want to provide any sort of comments? Okay, I don't think there are no further comments. Thank you. So I'll go back to you, Councillor Santos. Do you have any specific questions for the delegation?
Not for the delegation, but in respect to the presentation and the report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Santos. Councillor Singh, is it for the delegation? Do you have any questions?
Nope, it's about the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll proceed to then bring the report. And Councillor Santos, you're first on the board. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. And through you, Chair, thank you, Henrik and staff, for putting this together. It's really exciting. I'm super excited about this process and kind of the shift in thinking and update in thinking of priorities in the Transportation Master Plan. So I know that we are starting to shift our internal culture in terms of our priorities and how we implement transportation infrastructure. Another component in the presentation and the report was mentioning engagement and collaboration with the community. Today last week in the mail when I got my property tax bill, I received a pamphlet on education for drivers and cyclists on how to use and interact with bike lanes. I think that as we go through this transportation master plan review process, it's important not just to engage and collaborate with the community, but also provide education, because the way that we are moving forward in thinking with the guiding principles is also an education process as we shift away from the autocentric culture. And so just want staff to comment whether or not we will include an education component as we reach out to the community.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for your comments, Councillor Santos. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to your point that you saw those pamphlets, we've kind of started down that road. This is something that we're working together with our strategic communications staff and with Public Works with Jane's team in order to start to not only provide notice, but to start to message, I think, what it is that we're trying to do and the reasons that we're doing what we're doing. The TMP exercise will afford the opportunity, I think, to do that education. I think the first phase of the work that we're planning to undertake would involve things like the preparation of discussion papers on some of these big issues, and that's typically, the arena that provides that kind of education component. I think it's in our best interests to do that, because to get meaningful comment back on what we're proposing, we do want to have our residents knowledgeable and understanding the issues that we're trying to tackle.
Awesome, thank you. And to Gideon's point, Henrik, with respect to the priority of thinking as we move forward with the transportation master plan, it's my understanding, reading the report and from the presentation today, that we are prioritizing pedestrian, cyclists, multi-modes of transportation as our guiding principles in moving forward with the transportation master plan. Would you say that that's correct, or did I read that wrong?
No, that's correct, and that's, we're taking that page right out of the vision as well. And again, it's not something new. We've seen this is kind of the approach that's being taken in other areas that are kind of rethinking that transportation pyramid and kind of upending it. And pedestrians are put first, and then cyclists. It's a classification based on vulnerability, I think. But essentially, what we're talking about when we are talking about pedestrians and cyclists, that is really, if you're going to group them together, prioritizing active modes.
Okay, great. And I have a couple more questions on this. So as we move forward in this process, and we're looking at infrastructure, there are certain considerations, and I'm just wondering if you could comment on this and whether or not there will be thinking around this as well, with respect to intensification and sort of the minimum parking requirements or no parking requirements near transit hubs for intensification, and et cetera. This, like how we implement this plan or how we move forward in this review process has implications on some of those policies we're bringing forward kind of ahead of this transportation master plan. Just, and I'm sorry if I'm not being articulate here, but some comments on how this how we're going to integrate some of these other policies that we are bringing forward ahead of time with this transportation master plan, and how you guys are going to manage all these different balls that are up in the air.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. We do recognize that, and I think I didn't go through the list in the presentation. I think I had it in my notes, but the work on the transportation plan isn't being done in isolation of a number of other initiatives the city is also undertaking. So that includes the SERP, which has been completed, the official plan review, and we also recognize that the city is currently undergoing a citywide parking strategy that we're providing input into as well. From that perspective, the TMP, I think, will recognize that. I don't know yet in the scope how we're incorporating it. It's a discussion that had been had that we wouldn't be duplicating that work, but ultimately, when we talk about this TMP or whatever we call it, I tend to think of it more as an integrated mobility plan. It is about kind of corralling all of these different factors that influence or that are influenced by transportation considerations.
Great. And then another question is just about the development charge bylaws and this new plan that development charge bylaws will be based on once the plan is done. Is there, will we have enough in here to change the bylaw such that the development charges associated with growth will also include things like active transportation and micro-mobility transportation, et cetera, versus where we are right now? Or do we need to go to the province to ask for a different legislation or a change?
I think on one level, I think we need to continue doing that to advocate to the province for a change to the DC legislation. But what we'd heard when we went through the previous exercise was that the important thing is also for us as a city is to have that policy framework officially in place. So if we do have a plan that speaks to the role of active transportation in accommodating growth, for example, then those kinds of policies and directives in that report, as endorsed by council, would play a role in the development of the background of the transportation background DC update, and would play into that process. It's an issue that we'd be looking to our subject matter experts in finance to assist with, but also as part of the consultant exercise, I think in kind of the discussion paper, discerning what we are able to do in order to capture those types of improvements that aren't necessarily auto-oriented, but that ultimately do help accommodate transportation demand as a result of growth, and be able to capture those kinds of improvements under a development charges bylaw.
Thank you, Henrik. And I bring that up after my question around intensification and having zero parking requirements around transit hubs and the Queen Street corridor, for example, because those intensification projects are going to bring significant growth to the city and generate some development charges. But if we're giving developers a break in terms of saying to them, okay, well, you don't need to have any parking requirements, then we need some of those development charges to go elsewhere and pay for other things and growth infrastructure to allow that mobility across the city that does not involve the car. And whether that's active transportation or transit, those are two things that are important. One final question is on taking an integrated approach and collaborative approach, and that is how this transportation master plan may may impact the region and or collaborate with the region, and whether or not the region we need to push at the region to catch up with us on some of the things that we are implementing in Brampton.
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair, this exercise will involve the region staff. I think we do work in partnership with them. The fact that the region has roads within Brampton that are under their jurisdiction doesn't mean that we can just leave them. They're part of our network, and they have to be considered as such. So region staff would be key stakeholders on the working committee that'll go forward for developing our plan.
Thank you so much, Henrik and team. And Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move to accept the report and the presentation delegation. I'd also like to add part of the recommendation is to forward it to Peel Region. I'm wondering if we could just forward this as correspondence to the regional council. I know that some of my council colleagues from Mississauga are interested in seeing this in particular. Right now it's the budget process at the region, and I'd like to highlight some of the things that we are doing in Brampton so that it also takes priority on active transportation and climate action at the region of Peel. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. And now I have Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I just want to say I think this is very timely activity given changes in sort of working from home that have emerged after COVID. Obviously, it's going to change transportation patterns probably forever. And we're also seeing changes in whether it's auto driving cars or you know, electrical vehicles, electrical trucks. So a lot of innovation also happening. So I think that this review is very timely in that it can capture some of those changes and sort of dictate good policy moving forward. I just had two questions. One regarding, are we going to talk about what our roads are made out of? I hear a lot of references to sustainability, and I always bring this up wherever I can. I feel like there's a lot of innovation to be had there as well, and I know we had a couple of pilot projects. So are we going to start integrating some of that work into our plan to see what materials we use, how we make our roads, and all that? Thank you.
Through the chair to Councillor Singh, at the PMP level, which it's more of a strategic policy exercise. We probably wouldn't we're not going to get into the detail of kind of materials engineering for roads. Certainly there would be policy direction to consider those kinds of activities in the work that we do. But I might defer to Jane Holmes if she's there, that I think Public Works is already doing a lot of that kind of work, the research or the implementation and testing with those kinds of considerations in mind.
Thanks, Henry. And through the chair. Yes, Councillor Singh, thanks for the question. We'll be actually bringing in a report shortly in regards to our resurfacing projects. And we are always looking for ways to make our constructability of our roads more green, if you will, more sustainable. We do have a couple of pilot projects that we have underway in regards to recycled asphalt, to recycled concrete, also hot mix versus cold mix. So we're always looking at ways that we might be able to be more environmentally sustainable, and also talking a lot with our partners in other municipalities as well. So when other municipalities do some pilot projects, and we share the results with them on various committees. That's intel we can take in terms of, lessons learned and using them in our own roads. So while, it's such a large expense, we don't want to be necessarily a guinea pig for things that may not work because we'll simply be paying for that in the future. But we certainly are interested in anything that looks promising, anything that other people have tried that works, and certainly willing to listen to members of the industry that might have something new and exciting that they want to tell us about. So we're trying to keep abreast of all these issues and trying to use them in our projects as well.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is around goods movement, because it is something I am concerned about as we don't increase our lanes, and obviously with the BRT and potentially LRT coming down the pipeline, and obviously public transportation is amazing, and I support it. But I just want to make sure we're doing the work to look at goods movement, because I got stuck on Chrysler Avenue one day, and CN or CP, one of them is there, and it was just hundreds of trucks literally just stuck and idling. And my fear is if we're not looking at the flow of goods movement, obviously when you look at health determinants and environmental factors, I am concerned about the quality of air pollution, especially if we don't get this right. So what are we going to do to assure that we get this right? Because this does affect my wards, it affects Councillor Fortini's wards in particular directly, obviously affects all of Brampton, to make sure that, the trucks are coming in and out as smooth as possible. They're not idling for hours and hours, and at the end of the day, having health consequences in health for our residents.
Thank you for the question, Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely, the TMP will be looking at goods movement. It's one of the major, subject areas. In addition, we look at transit, we look at roads, we look at active transportation, travel demand management, and goods movement is up there, along with all those other priority areas. We certainly recognize the role that goods movement plays in Brampton as an economic generator, and it kind of defines a lot of the kind of the unique challenges that we do have to address in terms of transportation in Brampton. So the first point to make is that I was mentioning before, we're updating our travel demand model right now. So this travel demand model includes a freight module that will be able to project truck traffic on our roads, and then when we develop our different scenarios, it'll be able to look at kind of those flows of where trucks are able to move. The second point, I think, when we're talking about issues such as trucks lining up on one specific road to enter kind of a facility, it's a bit more of a situational problem. So widening a road isn't necessarily going to solve that. Some of those may come down to site design issues. I know that years ago now with the CP intermodal, there were some issues with trucks queuing on the public roadway, and then there was improvements required internally on the site to be able to accommodate that. So some of these are more operational issues, and I think those concerns are largely around the heavy truck movements, the tractor trailers, as opposed to the more general smaller delivery piece. Goods movement is quite a large portfolio. But the focus on the trucking side is absolutely something we'll be looking at. I know you're very well and familiar with the region that has the Goods Movement Task Force and the Goods Movement Center of Excellence, which we're members of that, and we would try to leverage some of that information. And again, part of having the region staff as stakeholders means that not only are we able to benefit of the information from them, but I think those kind of concerns we can bring forward to the region as well to see if there's any untapped ideas and solutions there. But certainly those questions are noted, and the TMP will be looking at recommendations on managing goods movement on our roads.
Okay, thank you very much. As I see no further questions or comments, I do have a motion moved by Councillor Santos, and I'll just give committee just a quick minute for you to review the motion. Okay, so the motion is moved by Councillor Santos. Does anyone oppose? No, so the motion carries. We move on now to staff presentations and planning reports. We've dealt with 7.1, 7.2, 7.3. We're on to committee minutes, and we've dealt with 8.1 in the consent motion. And we're on to 11.1 we've dealt with, and 11.2. So our next item is correspondence from the Region Appeal regarding establishment of its Planning and Growth Management Committee and request for Brampton to appoint 3 regional councillors to the committee. The correspondence accompanying report suggests the chair, vice chair of the local municipal planning committee be members. Do any members have any questions about these minutes? Councillor Fortini.
Mr. Chair, so we're supposed to pick a third one. I know I had a couple of councillors call me. I think, since Councillor Vicente sits on the housing strategy, I'd like to nominate him to come forward as a councillor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, City Clerk, if you, as of this moment, then, based on what was recommended, so the chair and vice chair would be members, and the third one we have a nomination for Councillor Vicente. Are there any other nominations? No. Okay. So, City Clerk, would you like to do this as a recorded vote?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's not necessary unless there's a request to do so. So the motion will be as shown on the screen to receive the correspondence and to appoint Councillor Medeiros, Councillor Fortini, and Councillor Vicente as members of the Regional Planning and Growth Management Committee.
Okay. So, is there any objections? The motion is moved by Councillor Fortini. Are there any objections? No. So the motion carries. We go now to Councillor question period. Are there any questions by members of committee? No. So we now go on to public question period. City Clerk, are there any questions from the public?
There are none, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. No closed session. So we go now to adjournment. Committee is next scheduled to meet Monday, February 22nd at 1 p.m. I have a motion moved by Councillor Bowman to adjourn tonight's meeting, that the Planning Development Committee do now adjourn to meet again on Monday, February 22nd at 1 p.m. or at the call of the chair. Is anyone opposed to this motion? No, the meeting is adjourned. So please stay home, stay safe, stay healthy, practice physical distancing, and have everyone a good night. And please wear face covering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee. We're just going to wait for